Alert! Aliens mock Earthlings' last stand. Our final warship approaches. And the arrogant invaders laughed across the cosmos when they were told a scattered species could hold out. But then the sleek silhouette of Earth's newest dreadnought lit up every sensor, and their derision turned to fear. For millennia, the Sordani Empire lorded over the center of the galaxy, unchallenged. Their territory stretched across thousands of star systems, ruled by a rigid caste system. From bastion throne worlds to distant mining outposts, the Empire's reach was beyond question. Many species swore fealty willingly, trading tribute for relative autonomy. The others, who were too stubborn or too naive, paid the price of defiance in orbital bombardments that left entire worlds ash. This iron-fisted dominion was powered by one fundamental belief: Sordani were better. Their biotech gifted them lifespan. Their Tier 3 beam and shield enabled them to not be stopped by fleets. Their culture glorified conquest. Enemies were either subserved or exterminated, never anything in between. To the Sordani, humanity hardly existed. In the past, one Sordani scout flotilla communicated with Earth's defensive forces. The year a long time ago when humans did not even have access to effective fast then. Light travel, when the home of mankind was bustling with promise, but no one had figured out high-quality warp drives yet. Deciding humanity was decades behind even minor species, the Sordani let Earth be, content to wait for it to either die or wither in irrelevance. Eventually, sporadic reports came through of humans carving out a presence on the galactic frontier, constructing jump gates, forming nascent alliances. The Empire saw them nonetheless as an afterthought. But as centuries turned to millennia, humanity treated herself a little braver. They colonized resource-rich asteroids, forged trading routes with lesser powers, and quietly reverse-engineered alien technology obtained through means less than above board. While Earth's overall might was dwarfed by the Sordani Empire, humans showed a degree of resilience and resourcefulness that unsettled some Sordani minds. And while the human frontier worlds occasionally clashed with the Empire's outposts, the Sordani always emerged as victors with little effort. The idea that humans could one day become a serious threat was ludicrous. That all changed once the Arcturus insurrection was unleashed. On an important industrial planet, a minor species within the Empire, stirred by dissatisfaction, rebelled and requested outside assistance. While many star nations feared a Sordani reprisal, the humans provided quiet covert aid, shipments of weapons, medical supplies, and intangible symbolical support. For a while there, the rebellion wreaked havoc on the Empire's logistical heart. It was ultimately crushed with brutal efficiency, but not before exposing an intractable truth to the Sordani High Command. Humans had the gall to interfere with the affairs of the Empire. Nevertheless, the Empire figured that exterminating humanity wasn't worth the hassle. The Sordani military was stretched, and Earth's far-flung colonies were rumored to harbor surprising bastions of resistance. They resorted to intimidation and economic blockades instead. In the years that followed, tensions grew. Human freighters had been seized, frontier worlds blockaded. Diplomatic efforts collapsed as the Empire required absolute subservience. Humanity never surrendered, not when most were convinced the final reckoning was upon us. The accelerating flashpoint came when Sordani battle groups began to concentrate around Rathium's sector, containing several human colonies and resource nodes. Empire mouthpieces blared smug pronouncements that human worlds would capitulate in a matter of days. At least on Earth, where the intelligence indicated there was little in the way of any capital ships, and that any effort made to and towards war was spread too thin. Unknown to peeping eyes, the humans had come together for a single, audacious project, the HSS Dauntless. They said it was a dreadnought, honed by decades of shared Terran and plundered alien tech, a war vessel of quite unparalleled speed, firepower, and stealth. The project's secrecy was so complete that even high-ranking officers in Earth's defense network knew only parts of its design. Could one starship really turn the tide against the power of an ancient empire? Inside the Sordani Command Center on Station Mayora, hovering over Rathium's largest planet, Admiral Rekavel felt complacent confidence. He wrapped a clawed finger on a holographic map of human outposts, each marked with the Empire's crest. The plan for invasion was simple: crush every colony in succession, disarm any human fleets by force, and make an ultimatum to Earth: join the Empire or die. High-ranking Sordani sub-admirals snickered and made jokes about humans, acting like they were relevant. Back in Earth's deep space shipyard orbiting an extinct star, the HSS Dauntless stood ready. Captain Althea Morgan, a veteran of many lesser space battles, looked over her crew on the bright-cheeked bridge. Engineers conducted other last-minute adjustments to the warp core calibrations, while weapons officers did final diagnostics on the rail cannons and beam disruptors. Every corridor bristled with anticipation. They knew the odds. The Sordani outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. But they also believed in the dauntless advanced systems and, more than anything, the undying spirit of man. All across the galaxy, watchers held their breath. If the alleged Terran supership failed, every human colony would be subjugated completely, if not exterminated. If somehow it worked, the galaxy might once more find itself in a new dynamic, with humans transitioning from minor players to a formidable one-force. The Sordani, accustomed to underestimating Earth, had no idea they might be about to deliver themselves a humiliating blow. So the final showdown was at hand. With this icons, he had stamped out the last vestiges of Terran resistance. The alien empire, confident in his assured victory, had assembled the fleets needed to eradicate the last few sprigs of Terran disease. Earth, pinned in a doomed corner, had wagered everything on one revolutionary warship. Both allies and enemies stared at the Starlines, wondering if the Dauntless was real or an endless doomed human legend. In the Rathium sector, Sordani warships hunted like apex predators. Lean cruisers clad in silver and green livery prowled the contested worlds, while vast carriers spewed forth waves of fighters to impose no-fly guidelines. And civilians on human colonies fled for safety, preparing for the inevitable onslaught. Sordani propaganda channels screamed messages demanding the surrender of humans, deriding any hope of resistance. Far in the reaches of space near the convergence of the sector's boundary, the HSS Dauntless slipped out of a slipstream warp bubble. Its hull glittered in obsidian sheen, marred by the banks of sensor dishes and weapon turrets. The Captain Morgan wasted little time. "Activate stealth suite," she commanded, and the Dauntless state-of-the-art cloaking system muffled its emissions to a whisper, the ship reduced to but a ghostly sensor echo lost within cosmic static. Minutes later, the Terran dreadnought was in the outskirts of Sordani's blockade. Dozens of the alien warships held a loose perimeter to intercept or destroy any of the incoming craft. Humanity had only its ancient frigates in this quadrant, no dreadnoughts, confirmed Sordani intelligence. The perimeter was efficient, but not hypervigilant. That complacency cost them. The Dauntless took its first shot without being seen. Two long-range rail cannons fired tungsten slugs at near-relativistic velocities. One Sordani cruiser was directly hit, the energy shields overloading with a shower of sparks before the slug pierced through its reactor core. The blast flared the sector in brilliant light. Surrounding warships scrambled, searching for the assailant. Readings show at least 4 capital ships changing course, Lieutenant Hussein reported from Dauntless Sensor Station. "They're pinging the system with advanced sweeps, but as yet, our cloak holds." Morgan gave a faint smile. "They'll see us soon enough. Fire a second salvo. Cripple any vessel that attempts to rally." A second pair of rail slugs flew through the void, striking a second cruiser's flank. This time, the target's shields partially absorbed the blow, but the energy transfer alone rendered its propulsion utterly untenable. Meanwhile, the Dauntless spun elegantly in the other direction, slipping ever deeper into the blockading noose, and forcing Sordani captains to guess its next attack vector. As the Sordani vanguard fell into a panic, Admiral Recavel's voice boomed across the command net. "Spot the intruder without delay. Homework. Vector 241, we can't let a single vessel make our lines impossible." But no orders he barked mattered. The blockade ships fumbled the coordination. Their scans found only faint traces, not enough for a solid lock. The Dauntless exploited that confusion, darting between pockets of Sordani warships, picking off straggling corvettes, and banging up larger ships with near-pinpoint fire from its rail cannon. For the first time in eons, the Sordani had met an opponent that matched them for stealth, raw firepower and nerve. What started as scoffing arrogance mutated into real concern. Those ships that had once rushed toward human colonies turned instead to retreat, desperate to intercept this lone and lethal interloper. The incursion made news all the way to the primary Sordani base on Station Mayora. Tens of capital ships raced from their docks, forming tidal waves of reinforcements. From a position in Mayora's war room, Admiral Recaval viewed data streams indicating that multiple Sordani ships were burning or drifting, a loss no one had imagined from only one engagement. He didn't believe it was merely a single Terran craft. They must have a whole strike force, the Admiral growled. I've never seen a single ship do this much damage this fast. But every scout and sensor array reported the same story. Only a single significant warp signature, and one that had confused their instruments. The sub-admirals of Sordani traded concerned looks. Were the humans so advanced now? Could all the previous intelligence have been so wrong? On the Dauntless, Captain Morgan's bridge vibrated with purposeful intensity. Status alerts marked every successful strike. The stealth suite was working, but it was working hard to keep up. The rail cannons were red-hot from constant firing. Between volleys, crew members scrambled to cool them down, venting super-chilled gases. The whole operation was a balancing act. Push too hard, and systems might break. Ease off, and the Sordani would reassert control. Captain, wound Yesem. Enemy forces incoming from Mayora. 10 or more capital ships, carriers and battleships, closing from starboard. Morgan nodded. Time to shift tactics. Enough hit and run. We'll open up our main battery on M. Helm, plot a direct course. Then let's fire up the ion disruptors. The Dauntless Advanced Weapon System, the Ion Disruptor Array, unleashed arcs of electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to register on a Richter scale and temporarily short out energy shields. One well-aimed barrage could blind a warship's defenses, rendering it vulnerable to conventional fire. Even the Sordani's renowned shielding had never faced such advanced disruptor tech. The Sordani vessels delivered their own volley of plasma torpedoes and beam lances as the Terran dreadnought streaked toward the newcomers. Many splashed against the Dauntless' own shield configuration without significant effect. Others sailed further wide as last-second adjustments of the thrusters threw them off. Then the Dauntless unleashed a brilliant bolt of bluish lightning. Streams of disruptor energy washed across the lead battleship's hull, overloading its shield generators and causing them to sputter before failing completely. In the next heartbeat, a slug of metal slammed into the unprotected armor and pierced deep into the engine block. The battleship's thrusters flared, the massive vessel listing off course, some compartments ablaze. Dumbfounded Sordani captains attempted to execute a pincer claw, but the Terran ship's sham appeared and vanished, fine-tuning it back above successive attacks. The sector had become studded with incapacitated vessels, glowing embers. Commander Vranish, an officer of sword shape and grim determination, attempted to make radio contact with a subfleet of cruisers, but found them dispersed into fleeing consternation. On the monitors appeared one unstoppable wave after another of devastation from this human dreadnought. On one pouring cruiser, a Sordani lieutenant shouted, "We can't take this. We need to rejoin the main fleet, or we're done for." This sentiment reverberated throughout a number of channels. Even Admiral Recaval, a hardcore believer in Sordani supremacy, started sweating. The unstoppable power of his empire seemed stoppable. But the Sordani wouldn't give up all their territory. They mounted a counteroffensive around Coulter's Point, a gravitational anomaly near Rathium's biggest gas giant. It was the escort group that would lure the Dauntless to an ambush by a crossfire of heavy dreadnoughts fitted with specialized anti-stealth scanners to pin the Terrans in a stand-up basher. As their bloodied spearhead fell back, the humans could be trailing right behind, into a deadly ambush. Captain Morgan was no fool, examining her sensor readouts. The Dauntless reported the conglomeration of dreadnoughts near Coulter's Point. "They're creating a trap," she said, her voice cool. "We can go around, but if we don't deal with that group, they're going to continue to pressure the colonies." Her deputy, Commander Yates, agreed. "We need to lure them out, not walk into their kill zone. We could falsify warp signatures behind them, forcing their reposition." A grin touched Morgan's lips. "Let's do it. Prepare the decoy drones." a suite of advanced drones that mimicked warp signatures, and partial sensor profiles traveled in the dauntless shadow. They could possibly fool the Sordani into thinking a Terran fleet was jumping behind their lines. With that, the humans hoped to separate the dreadnoughts and kill them individually. Within minutes, the drones launched from secret launch bays. They took off to distant coordinates, each emulating Terran capital ship signatures. The phantom readings were picked up by Sordani dreadnoughts near Coulter's Point. Confused chatter followed. More than one FTL arrivals behind us. No way. Tempers flared as captains bickered. Staying in the trap zone would expose them to flanking from unknown forces. A breakthrough success, the trap formation broke. Some of the dreadnoughts peeled off in pursuit of the apparition fleet. Some stayed behind but lost the advantage of being unified. This was what the Dauntless had been waiting for. It raced forward at full throttle, unleashing a punishing flurry of anion disruptors and rail slugs. Within that maelstrom of chaos, 2 dreadnoughts suffered crippling hits. Another swung around for a retaliatory strike and found its weapons locked by Terran countermeasures. The indomitable juggernaut that had been the Sordani defense line shattered once more. Panic seized them at this point. Never had the Sordani faced an enemy as skilled in stealth, cunning illusions, and brutal firepower. That first arrogance, naming humans lesser beings, morphed into a desperate fear. The Admiral stood on the command dais of Station Mayora, watching feed after feed of battered ships. He fought to prevent the last few capital ships capable of operational combat from breaking and running outright. And even as the Terran dreadnought blazed a gaping hole through Sordani lines, pockets in the endless sea of darkness, the humans on the besieged colonies, caught in the clutches of death, felt a flicker of hope. The blockade ships that had menaced them now withdrew or lay in smoldering ruin in orbit. Civilians had come out of bunkers, cheering for the transmissions that a single Earth ship was victorious. On secret frequencies, rebel factions rally, embracing this once-in-a-lifetime chance to undermine Sordani garrisons in their own backyard. As his last-ditch face-saving measure, Admiral Recaval ordered the activation of Omega Lance, a world-killing beam placed on Station Mayora itself. If the humans insisted upon defiance, the Empire would feel no compassion. They would annihilate one major colony in order to deliver a message. This brutal plan leaked to the Dauntless through a captured Sordani comm signal. Captain Morgan felt a chill. They needed to stop it, or so many people would die. And so the conflict escalated to a fever pitch. With most blockade ships destroyed or disabled, the Dauntless turned its attention toward Station Mayora. Streaking forward at maximum burn, the Terran vessel prepared for one last engagement. If they could destroy or cripple the Omega Lance, the Sordani's moral and strategic edge would evaporate. But Mayora was well guarded, encircled by defense platforms bristling with cutting-edge beam turrets and the shattered remains of the Sordani fleet, massing for a final stand. At every channel, the alien empire hesitated. The unstoppable tide of conquest that had once been their hallmark was, for the first time, challenged by a species they'd looked down on as weak. They underestimated humans. Then our warship showed up. Now, the galaxy bore witness to that warship, newly commanded, ready to put an end to the war where it had begun, rewriting the balance of power in the cosmos. The endgame was in sight. Station Mayora floated high above the shattered colonial world of Everest Prime like a steel giant, flanked by a pair of defense platforms bristling with banks of beam cannons. At the heart of the station, the Omega Lance, an enormous particle beam repurposed for planetary bombardment, crackled with pent-up energy. Admiral Recaval thought a show of force would restore Sordani's superiority. If the humans witnessed an entire colony incinerated, perhaps they would finally submit. But the HSS Dauntless still had work to do. Captain Althea Morgan had planned a direct assault on Station Mayora and knew the toll it would take. The station bristled with more weaponry than a small fleet could muster. Along with the half-dozen damaged but still deadly capital ships coalescing for a final stand, it signified the Sordani's last bastion within Rathium. If the Dauntless faltered here, the Empire would regroup, crush the human worlds, and reign unencumbered once again. Full frontal is suicide, Commander Yates said on the bridge of the Dauntless. We'll be mired by their defense platforms. and the Omega Lance is charging up. We may not have time to pick them off. Morgan's eyes darted across the tactical readouts. The station's schematic showed a ring of overlapping shield generators, forming a nearly impenetrable barrier. We'll have to make them shoot themselves, she said. The Empire lives in fear, she said. Let's turn that aggression back against them. If we can do, inside their formation, the station's platforms could take out friendly ships attempting to hit us. Their plan was daring. Attack from an unanticipated direction and take advantage of the overlapping fire arcs of the station. The Dauntless still had partial stealth, enough to delay targeting for a brief period of time. If they brought the Sordani capital ships close to each other, the station's heavy cannons risked friendly fire. Meanwhile, the humans would look for a vulnerability in the Omega Lance's cooling arrays, a structural weak point. A single well-placed rail slug could cause an internal meltdown. Out there, the mangled Sordani dreadnoughts made a ring of defense around Mayora, shredded hull plates shining beneath makeshift shields. The station's defensive arrays bristled with potency, poised to unchain beams of energy that could cleave through anything. Admiral Recaval strode to and fro on the command deck of the station. "Let them come," he growled, "and we will turn their warship to atoms." Beneath a haze of partial cloak, the Dauntless came from behind a debris field left in the wake of previous skirmishes. The station's scanners pinged instantly. They unleashed a barrage of plasma and beam turrets. Under the onslaught, the Terran dreadnought's shield flared. The hull groaned, but the Dauntless moved ahead, turning to dodge beams of energy. Short's bursts from its thruster drive allow it to pivot in ways no large ship is meant to, confusing Sordani aim. The cloak's failing, Lieutenant Hussein warned. In fact, a barrage of hits and a thorough scan broke the stealth system. Quick as a blink, the Dauntless was fully revealed, an onyx blade through the station's hide. Beam lances know no flame. They drew arcs across space as the Sordani capital ships tightened the noose. Others splashed against the Dauntless, leeching away layers of shielding. Others flew wide, threatening collisions with friendly ships. It was nearly impossible to control the chaos. Captain Morgan made the most of that. Disruptor pulse, target nearest capital ship's engine block. The ion disruptor spat out a net of crackling energy at a warship trying to maneuver around to their flank. Sparks rained across its hull, taking out shield arrays. The Dauntless responded with a rail slug that punched through the cruiser's midsection. Internal fires raged. Afraid they would be annihilated, the Sordani cruiser tipped and veered into the path of a station beam that could not be adjusted in time. An explosion from a friendly fire event blasted off the cruiser's prow, which sent metal fragments whirling in different directions. The lines of the Sordani shifted once again. Inside Station Mayora, Admiral Recaval cursed. "All batteries cease fire until a confirmed lock. No more wasted shots." The station's giant cannons slowed, hunting for optimal angles. But the Dauntless took full advantage of every opening, diving close to the hull of a battered battleship. The station's gunners could not risk firing, as they feared shooting their own ship. Meanwhile, Alone plugged the battleship weapons array and hammered it until it finally exploded in a flame ball. Now the Dauntless only had a pair of capital ships and the station's platforms between her version of the Omega Lance. Homeline sensing an opening, Captain Morgan called for maximum thrust. The dreadnought powered up, rushing toward a shell of platforms that readied for one last barrage. Blinding beams flicked here and there, some skipping across the hull of the Dauntless, but a last-second feint made several air platforms hold their fire or risk hitting each other. Firing solution on Lance's cooling arrays locked in, Lieutenant Hussein said. "We have a limited arc from Sector 8, but it's open to the station's primary cannon." Morgan set her jaw. "We either take that shot, or we watch them incinerate a whole colony. Prepare the rail cannons. No secondary systems, redirect power to shields. This is it." The Dauntless charged the enemy, absorbing glancing hits. On the command deck of the station, Recaval had recognized his target, the vulnerable flank of the Omega Lance. He bellowed for all cannons to aim down that feed, hell-bent on blowing the Terrans clean before they could pull the trigger. The end was a moment of truth, in which both sides unleashed devastation. The station's main gun vomited a brilliant golden beam that speared through the vacuum. The Dauntless shield shimmered, white-hot and fracturing in spots. There were explosions all over the Terran hull. Alarms shrieked, and deck plating clattered wildly. Simultaneously, the dauntless rail cannons lit up with lethal energy. Slug after slug fired, punching into the station's outer defenses. One of them sailed wide, another deflected off a sturdy shield segment, but the third shot right into the Omega Lance's crucial heat sink. A microsecond of hush fell. Then a cataclysmic detonation exploded through the Lance's internal structure. Fires tore through the station's corridors, causing chain reactions in the power grid. Rings spat fire, and hull plates unzipped in blossoming gouts of flame. A well-aimed Terran blow brought down the supposed superweapon. The station's readouts went dark, final testimonies of a meltdown beyond control, and Admiral Recavel bellowed in anger. At last built station deep glance flickered out across Sordani channels. Divorced from central coordination, the half-dozen defense platforms began to drift. The damaged capital ships, unable to act, fled the sector via emergency FTL jumps. Their last communications dripped with shock and shame. Retreat. The station is lost. They had never conceived humans capable of dismantling Mayora's impenetrable stronghold. On the Dauntless, showers of sparks rained down on the bridge. Multiple compartments had been partially breached in the ship's hull. Engineering readouts indicated that half of the systems were compromised. But they were alive, victorious. Captain Morgan fought to keep. Standing through the quakes, she took a calming breath. Damage control teams, check for hull breaches. Helm, establish a stable orbit around Everest Prime. Let's make sure the Lance is really offline. There was a hush on every comm channel in the Rathium sector. The local command of the unstoppable Sordani Empire was in tatters, with fleets scattered and the superweapon destroyed. Freed colonies from a blockade sent cheers and gratitude, astonished that a single warship had broken the Empire's delusions of invulnerability. It was the first point the Sordani grasped about their mistake. They underestimated humans. Then our warship showed up. For hours afterward, the Dauntless orbited the planet now freed, searching for survivors or hostiles. The wreckage of Station Mayora drifted in a silent circle, burning fragments of it periodically entering the atmosphere of the planet. On a single intact platform, an entire company of Sordani Marines attempted to make a stand, but they surrendered the moment that they saw the Dauntless and knew they had no chance. As the dust cleared, there was a wave of awe, disbelief everywhere. The unthinkable had happened. Humans had matched the Empire's might in a pitched battle and won. Although the Sordani Empire had many more fleets, the stigma of defeat within the Rathium sector would not easily fade. Planetary governors, who had previously put unquestioning faith in Recavel and Imperial supremacy, began to question their loyalties. Minority species who had resented Sordani hegemony began considering new alliances. Maybe Earth could help them, too. Inside the battered but victorious Terran dreadnought, crewmen slumped in relief. Medical units healed burns and fractures. Engineers sealed ruptured decks. The victory's momentum drowned out every ache. Captain Morgan paced the corridors, thanking her weary crew. "We've made a difference in the galaxy today," she said. "But the battle might not be finished. We must remain ready." At least for the time being, the conflict in Rathium was settled. Humanity had held the field, having shown that guile, determination, and superior tech could bring down the most powerful enemy. The last messages received from fractured Sordani capitals chronicled a harsh new reality. They could no longer ignore humans as negligible. To the largest empire, the smallest frontier colony, all were rocked by that revelation, that Earth's warship had forced a paradigm shift in galactic affairs. For days after Station Mayora had laid in ruin, the Rathium sector cast off centuries of Sordani fear. Local human colonies began to thaw from survival mode and quickly re-establish trade routes and forge new defense pacts under the proud banner of Earth. Nearby star systems took notice, dispatching envoys to the bruised but victorious HSS Dauntless. They sought reassurances or alliances from the species that had just brought down the Empire's most formidable stronghold in the region. Throughout human space, spontaneous celebrations broke out. Colonists who once prepared for death by extermination now set off fireworks in dusty planetary settlements. Kids played in open courtyards, free from the growing threat of Sordani battlecruisers flying over them. Back on Earth itself, the news feeds carried the same iconic image, the Dauntless in orbit around Everest Prime, flanked by the burning ruins of the Empire's once impregnable station. By morning, the warship's crew were legends. But so floated with this jubilation, sobering voices urged that the Sordani Empire extended well beyond this little corner of Rathium. There were rumors that the Emperor was furious and called for a full retribution. Some anticipated a second wave of gigantic fleets, larger than anything seen in this battle. But the blow to imperial pride was bitter. Sordani. Admirals wondered whether the Empire was even ready to counter a new human superdreadnought, let alone others yet to come. The legend of Sordani invincibility had cracked, and lesser species were finding hope for wider revolts. Repairs continued 24 hours a day on the Dauntless itself. Hull plating had to be replaced, shield generators required recalibration, the rail cannons were close to meltdown. Captain Althea Morgan supervised a weary crew who labored night and day, driven by the knowledge they had achieved the impossible. The after-action reports emphasized the risk they took. One misstep and the Sordani could have vaporized them. But fortune favored the bold. In a quiet moment on the warship's observation deck, Morgan looked down at the planet below. She remembered the contemptuous boldness with which the Empire had disregarded humanity's potential, how the Sordani had forecast a rapid, bloodless victory. This arrogance gave birth to their complacency and left them exposed to a technologically superior and insatiable Terran wave of destruction. Now star nations everywhere challenged the old hierarchies. The expression, "they underestimated humans. Then our warship showed up," became a rallying cry, heard in subspace chatter and at frontier station bars. As leaders on Earth debated the next tactical step, diplomacy, shoring up alliances, or gearing up for additional combat. The Dauntless had become the flagship of a new era. Delegations from formerly oppressed species boarded, giving thanks and asking for assistance in toppling Sordani outposts. Other humans were cautious, fearing that they might open the flame of all-out war. Others argued that with the Sordani on the ropes, the hammer needed to fall across many sectors, and they should all be liberated. However the grand strategy ultimately played out, one fact held true. The galaxy no longer saw humanity as a minor footnote. That narrative, too, had been rewritten at Rathium in plasma blasts and rail lance shots. The Empire might conspire for revenge, but it could not conceal the truth that a Terran dreadnought had met overwhelming odds and won. Other powers, whether neutral confederations or smaller kingdoms, recalibrated their position on Earth, either wary or enthused to court this ascendant star. As for Admiral Recavel, he fled the destruction of Station Mayora in a shuttle, carrying chicken shit shame of defeat. He would take that stigma to Sordani High Command, be forced to explain how a single human warship addressed an entire sector blockade. The Emperor's anger can be quick, but not even the throne could readily bury the fiasco, or stop the murmurs that Sordani juggernaut is showing its age, susceptible to new strategies and technologies it never dreamed of. On Everest Prime itself, liberated colonists established a monument honoring fallen, human and otherwise, who died in fighting. Crowned by a stylized silhouette of the Dauntless, it was a monument to the day everything changed. Veteran soldiers and civilians alike stopped by and left tokens of gratitude. Children ran their fingers across an inscription that read, "They mocked us, they cornered us," until the Dauntless arrived. As humanity and its allies looked to the stars, they knew the battle was far from over. The Empire would not go quietly. But there was one important lesson universally learned. Earth's children, that once small and untried generation, had become an unstoppable will. They had wielded technology, craftiness, and brute determination to overthrow an apparently invincible empire. That echo of triumph rang across every frequency. The Sordani would no longer dismiss Terrans as a weak, a species to be forgotten. In a single, decisive campaign the Dauntless and her crew had laid those illusions to rest. The ground was laid for more struggles to come, but empowered by new hope and resolve. A path forward for humanity was uncertain, but brighter than ever. For they had demonstrated that humans, it turned out, were worth both underestimating and killing only at one's peril. a lesson the galaxy was about to be reminded of for centuries to come.